working? Oh, yes, so, yes, thank you very much, Will. And thank you very much, Rob, and the team for inviting me. It is such a privilege to be here. Oh, any good? So just to point out this, so we talked a little bit about drug science. Heroic Hearts Project is a combat veteran charity taking veterans with trauma abroad to access psychedelic-assisted therapy, and generally at retreat centres, because it is illegal in this country. So that is kind of shameful for this country, that is necessary for their healing. Policy at Manchester is a policy unit, and their aim is to get academics research to change policy. And I'm working towards rescheduling psychedelics, particularly psilocybin, so we can get on with our research. So the laws are hindering research and patient access. So in many ways, they're working to hinder the whole field. So Drug Science is the UK's leading independent organisation providing information, evidence-based information for everybody about drugs. So I chair the Medical Psychedelics Working Group. We have 3 working groups: medical cannabis, which enables patients to access medical cannabis. So that's one of the few ways you're going to get it in this country. And the harm reduction working group. So it's a real privilege to be chairing, such an eminent group of people. It's very diverse group of people. So we have many aims: education, and I highly recommend the Drug Science podcast. I have the honour of co-hosting that now with Dave Nutt and Hannah Thurger, and that's a real treat. So there's loads of podcasts on psychedelic-assisted therapy, for education. We have run a series of events. Women in Psychedelics was how we started. We've been going about 3 years. I mean, our overall aim is to enable patient access to psychedelic-assisted therapy on the NHS. But of course, they're not legal. We're not there yet. But we're working towards this through our work with, we have many partners. Therasil enabling people at the end of life to access psychedelics in Canada. Korea lobbying Brussels to change the law, the European laws. And as I said, rescheduling. Dave and I gave evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee. Stigma, this conference is all about stigma. Psychedelics have been massively stigmatized over the years. And you talk to many people out there and they're frightened of the effects. And we also do research. So I am I was an animal researcher working in drug discovery for psychiatry. So looking for better treatments for many psychiatric disorders. So for substance use disorders, for severe depression, for schizophrenia, anxiety. 40 years, and we've really not come very far in terms of patient benefit and patients accessing better therapy. So actually, a lot of therapies we're using are sort of derivatives from those that were originally developed in the 1950s. I worked on some brilliant projects, but actually one of the best projects I worked on over 10 years ago, the chap bought the molecule from Glaxo 25 years ago. It's still in phase 2. It's such a slow process, and it's so frustrating. So about 6 years ago, I gave that up to focus on psychedelic medicine because they work. And this is what people need. And Big Pharma pulled out of this area about 10 years ago. So I would say drug discovery in psychiatry has hit a brick wall. And I don't have to tell you this, but we have a mental health crisis. The rates of depression, severe depression, this is where people are just not responding to current treatments. And, only about a third of people experience remission, and this is mild to moderate cases of depression, kinds of people, either students, people without severe depression, and the benefits tend to be quite short-term. And don't forget that you're taking a medicine every day, and therefore you have a very big side effect burden. And that is something that psychedelic paradigm avoids, and that is immense for people. So, you can read this for yourself. It costs the UK economy a lot of money. Many, many people unable to work, unable to live their lives, and that is not right. And some stats about what happened during the pandemic, so mental health worsened for so many people, and a huge impact on all of us. So what are psychedelics then? I'm sure many of you know, but the point of this really is that they are plant medicines. So, they grow all around us. These are the magic mushrooms, psilocybin-containing mushrooms. They grow all around us. People pick them all the time in autumn when all the mushrooms, are out there. And indigenous people have used these plant medicines for thousands of years, for spiritual purposes, for rituals, for healing. And they're illegal. It doesn't make any sense for a plant to be illegal, certainly not to me anyway. So, drugs like mescaline comes from peyote, and this is the Banisteriopsis vine. Ayahuasca is a brew that comes from the vine, and the active ingredient is DMT, it's dimethyltryptamine. And iboga there, and of course we have the synthetic psychedelics. Will's already mentioned LSD, and this is kind of the one that most of you have heard of, and of course ecstasy. So you will notice that the structure of LSD and psilocybin is fairly similar to serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, that is derived from the body, and ecstasy is a little bit more similar to amphetamine. So this is really the psilocybin is where most of the clinical trials are focused on at the moment, because it's shorter acting than LSD. DMT is shorter acting again, so clinically may be the best option. You won't have to keep people in the clinic for quite so long. So the four things I like to tell people about psychedelics, and I hope this is probably the thing that you will remember about these. Psychedelics heal people. We don't heal people in psychiatry. We manage people's symptoms. So this is extraordinary, and this is something that we have to enable people to have access to. And I alluded to this, that the dosing paradigm is completely different. So it's a 1 or 2, 3 high doses, and that is a very challenging psychological experience, but that is what causes the trip, is what causes the healing process for people. And I started this work a few years ago, and I've talked to a lot of people who've had that healing experience, and those stories are absolutely extraordinary. The effects are very long-lasting, so in many cases people don't need another psychedelic. A few people I've spoken to have not accessed it again, and they're still well. Some people may need to top up 6 months of it. You have no side effect burden. This is extraordinary. And they're remarkably safe molecules. So it's very difficult, it would be very difficult to overdose on a psychedelic. Notwithstanding that this is an altered state of consciousness and it's a challenging psychological experience. So are they really safe? Well, if you look at David Nutt's multi-criteria decision analysis, probably many of you have seen this, so he ranks drugs according to the harm to self and the harm to the user. And the psychedelics come practically nowhere. Alcohol, heroin, cocaine come high up, as you would expect. So really they do not cause harm. They certainly don't cause harm to society, to others. And we thought when we dive into the literature, what's been published already, and we'd see what the adverse effects are. So because of their effects on the serotonin system, and maybe so it's the serotonin 2A receptor that they interact with, but they're not completely selective. So they interact with other serotonin receptors that are present on blood vessels. There's a load of serotonin swishing about throughout the body, and the heart valve. So you do get an increase in blood pressure and an increase in heart rate in most of the trials and retreats and all the information we can find in the literature. But those effects are transient and are not long-lasting. So that's kind of a minor effect, as long as you don't have significant cardiovascular issues. So that's something we need to explore in a bit more detail. But as I said, challenging experiences for people. And we talk about set and setting, so you need to be in the right mindset, and you need to be in the right place with the right people to have a kind of a healing experience, which is really what we want. So the history of psychedelic medicine is very interesting, and I guess many of you have heard of Albert Hofmann. He first synthesized LSD in 1938. He was working for Sandoz, big pharmaceutical company. You know, famously he took it himself. They knew this was an important drug, but they didn't really know what to do with it. So they distributed it to psychiatrists, to psychotherapists, to anybody who wanted to research it. So the point about this is there was an awful lot of research done in the 50s and 60s. Lots of clinical trials for pain, for existential anxiety and depression, in people with a terminal diagnosis, people reaching the end of their lives, for substance use disorders. So this is not, you know, we're in a psychedelic renaissance now, but this is not entirely new. There was a lot of work going on. And Humphrey Osmond, the British psychiatrist, couldn't do the work here, went abroad, and he treated 2,000 people with alcohol use disorder with LSD, and he got a 40% abstinence rate. And I'll show you a wee bit of data in a minute. Ecstasy is another molecule that was made by pharma, made by Merck. They were looking for a drug that would treat blood clotting disorders and stumbled upon ecstasy. Again, they didn't really know what to do with it. It was put on the shelf, and they started to look at the pharmacology, you know, years later. And then Shulgin synthesized it. Again, he was working for Dow Chemicals. So many of these synthetic psychedelics have been discovered or by pharma. And I love this. He called it empathy, which I think is a great name for ecstasy. So it's not complete. So there you can see, this is from 1950 up to early 70s. You can see that there were a lot of research papers published, and it was kind of gathering a pace, and we were having a good understanding of the clinical benefits. 71 comes along, the UN Convention. They put all psychedelics, Class A, Schedule 1 drugs, which means I can't research it. I can apply for a controlled drugs license. Very difficult process. We did some research to show that many academics in the UK who are in smaller institutions, they won't bother. It's too expensive, it's too bureaucratic. You know, they haven't got the time and the money. So it's stopping a lot of people doing really valuable research. But we get this kind of psychedelic renaissance when people are starting. People like the old guard, like Rick Doblin, Bill Richards, Dave Nichols, David Nutt, knew about this, and they decided to cut through the bureaucracy, or to put up with it, and to start the clinical trials again. But of course we've got, drugs that we kind of know are not sufficient for the mental health needs of the population. And now, there are over, if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, there are over 400 registered clinical trials for psychedelics, and loads of those are for psilocybin. Because there are many companies either growing psilocybin, to clinical standard, or manufacturing it. And it's kind of, at the moment, it's a bit of an ideal because it's short acting. This is a bit of a nightmare slide, but if this is to come into clinical practice, it has to be approved by the FDA, it has to be approved EMA, NICE, so we have to have large clinical trials. And this one, and so something here, these are published in hugely high impact journals. I've never published in Nature or the New England Journal of Medicine, so this is just to show you that the sort of scientific establishment really are behind this. But it's data and it's evidence, and that's what we're seeing now. So this is probably the biggest trial. This is a multi-center trial, which hasn't really been done with psychedelics. So this was also a brave trial, because this is treatment-resistant depression. So this is people who've not responded to maybe 6 different currently available antidepressants. These are people not living a life at all, and suicide rates are very, very high in this population. And they're very hard to treat them. So the STAR-D trial is probably the biggest UK trial, looking at novel interventions for this group, and they got 13% success rate. Long story short, the psilocybin trial, and this is over 200 people, which is very big for a psychedelic trial, 25 milligrams, which was the highest dose they tested, which will give you a very significant psychological experience, with therapy. So this is psychedelic-assisted therapy. You have to preparation beforehand and integration afterwards. And bringing it into the NHS, that'll probably be group integration, I would have thought. Otherwise, it will be too expensive and NICE will not go for it. And that, I think, will work for many people. But anyway, if people don't need it, I guess they can get individual. So this is a good reduction in the depression score, and they got a 37% remission or response rate. And that read out at 3 weeks. They're not reading it out any further. But they're in their their phase 3 trial, which will be 900 people. And when that reads out, which will be 2025, then we should get approval if the results are as good as this, because this is life-saving for people. MDMA, the MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, led by Rick Dublin in the States. Again, these are quite big trials. This is 90 people. These are people with intractable PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And, you know, as I've spoken to these combat veterans, what do you get offered for this? You get CBT, you have to wait 3 months, and you get an SSRI. They're not going to work for PTSD. You might get EMDR if you're lucky. So we have a big population of people with trauma who are not being treated. And the substance misuse in these people, as you would expect, coping, is massive. And for the military, it's alcohol is their kind of drug of choice. 3 sessions of ecstasy with the therapy in 19 people. 67% of those people no longer met the criteria for PTSD. Can't do that with anything else. Extraordinary. And there's just been a trial read out with DMT, and this is IV DMT, it's very short acting. And they got a 57% remission rate. Phenomenal. And that was 1 dose of DMT. So this is extraordinary, isn't it? So just to go back, I know that you're substance use experts. Just to go back to what was happening pre the ban, if you like, in the 1970s. So this is a meta-analysis of the best trials for alcohol use disorder with LSD, because, as I showed earlier, Hoffman didn't synthesize psilocybin in the lab until the late 50s, so most of the work was done originally with LSD. And these are double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials, which are very hard to do anyway, but with a psychedelic it's a particular challenge because you kind of know you've got one on board. But overall, the best trials, they picked 6, and this is about 580 people, and they got an overwhelming success rate that LSD, and these effects lasted up to a year, and this is generally 1 dose of LSD with the therapy. So it's completely changing the mindset of people, and actually this is a neurobiological and psychological effect. And if you read significant insights into their problems, they've been given a new lease of life and a big resolution to discontinue or to change behaviour. So this is really changing mindset. Now, bring us forward to today. We have some much smaller trials, 10 people, heavy drinkers in this trial, with psilocybin. Again, this is 2 doses of psilocybin, a couple of weeks apart, and this is a high dose. But dramatically is reducing the number. Now these are open label trials, so these are not double-blind placebo controlled, because they're really expensive and difficult to do, and there is no funding for psychedelic research. So this is all coming from pharma, from philanthropy money. In the States, there's a little bit more government funding. Here we have none. So that's something we really need to change. How many? Thank you, Will. So, significantly reduced drinking, and these effects lasted 9 months. They ran the trial out to that. The ecstasy trial in Bristol, quite a Ben Sessa, if you know Ben, it's quite an infamous trial. This is treatment as usual, and this is the amount of people drinking more than 14 units a week. So that was, you can see some success there, but compared to the ecstasy group, and this was 14 people, this was 2 doses of ecstasy, a couple of weeks apart with therapy, you're getting 21% of people still consuming a lot of alcohol.